Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. Sorry I'm not there. Sometimes life happens. I'm doing this. It's almost 9:30. I know that's probably not very late for you guys, but I've got little kids and didn't sleep well and have been up since 4:30. So I'm hopefully going to be able to keep my head together enough to make this video for you. What I want to do is introduce some concepts to you. When I get through this, you're going to have time left in class because this is just introductory. So when I get through this, what I want you to do is a couple of things. Number one, I want you to do some research on major Mesopotamian gods, what they're responsible for and why it matters. Okay. Spend a few minutes doing that. And then I need you to work on some memory verses. Okay. So I need you guys to do that, right? Be nice to the sub, please. I am going to give you a brief introduction to what we're going to start talking through in terms of how we answer philosophy's questions, but how ancient cultures like Mesopotamia and Babylon answered those questions by using religion and the gods as a way to explain that. Okay, so first thing is a reminder, and that's this. Remember, theology and philosophy answer the same sets of questions, but they answer them from different perspectives and from different viewpoints. So theology begins with things about the realm beyond this one, things we can't necessarily know without it having been revealed to us. And philosophy begins with what we can observe in the world around us. And they will meet in the middle. Sometimes when they meet in the middle, it's a clash. Sometimes when they meet in the middle, they come together nicely and it works really well. When we look at what ancient mythologies are doing, there's a couple of things. Number one, they're explaining theology. They're explaining to people how these theologies worked so that they had an understanding of what they were believing in and who they were worshiping and why it mattered and how not to make that God mad. On the other hand, they also had an explanatory effect for the life that people lived. And so some of what we're getting in these myths and in these stories about this God married that God and had these kids, or this God married that God, and that's why the rain and the crops work together. What you're getting in those stories is an explanation for why the world works the way that it works. And so in that regard, what it's doing is ultimately a kind of philosophic thing. It's trying to answer questions that philosophy is concerned with, but it's doing it by providing you a theological answer. And so some of the time it's just out to tell you the stories of these gods and communicate that this is why these gods matter. On the other hand, sometimes it's out to tell you something about this is how and why the world works the way that it works. And it's bigger than just this God and that God and why the story matters. When we look at Mesopotamian religion, and this is some of the first civilizations on the planet. Okay, so we're going all the way back to cities you may not have even ever heard of, Sumer and Akkad and Ur, where Abraham is from, and Ut, where Job is from. Okay, over there in ancient Babylon, what Genesis refers to as Babel, right? The Tower of Babel. It's pre-Babylon, Babylon, sort of like Babylon 1.0. So anyway, what we're doing here is we look at these civilizations in Mesopotamia. We notice a couple of really critical things. Number one, their stories are explaining functions of life that they're familiar with, but they don't know why it works. So the thunderstorm is frightening. And thunderstorm is frightening, just triggered thunderbolts and lightning. Very, very frightening. If you know the song, great. Enjoy the moment with me. If not, it's 9:30. Give me a break. The thunderstorm is scary, but the rain from the thunderstorm is good for the ground. The water from the storm helps produce crops. And so there's a connection. We need the thunderstorm, but it's terrifying when it shows up. The thunderstorm is fantastic because it brings something to the earth And then the earth produces vegetation, and we can eat that stuff. And that's good for us. At the same time, the thunderstorm, when it gets out of hand, like lightning strikes stuff and burns it to the ground because it lights it on fire. Well, that's not good. So on one hand, we have a thunderstorm that's scary and that's dangerous. On the other hand, we have a thunderstorm that produces a thing, rain, that we need to grow things like crops. So we have food, and so that our animals have food, because then we can eat the animals too. So we need the thunderstorm, but we're terrified of it. Well, why does a thunderstorm work the way that it works? Why is it necessary that you get rain with thunder and lightning? Why can't we just have the good stuff? Part of their explanation for that is it's a God. And that God is powerful and mighty. And sometimes that power shows up and it's terrifying, but it's restrained and it's organized and it's aimed. It's helpful. And sometimes it shows up and it's out of hand. And it's angry and it's vicious and it's destructive. And it's the same entity because it's the same thing. It's this thunderstorm. And so whoever or whatever it is that's behind the thunderstorm is sometimes benevolent and brings us rain and good things we need so we can grow crops. We could have water to drink. But sometimes homie's a little angry and he terrorizes the village. And so part of what we're getting early in these Mesopotamian stories is explanations of why the world works the way it works. What you end up creating as you string those storylines together and you look at this is a nexus of gods that are all interconnected. And so you end up creating a pantheon that we're familiar with. And so you guys are way more familiar with Greco-Roman pantheons, right? Zeus and Athena and Apollo, if we want to use some Greek terminology for it, right? Or if we want to talk about Mars or Jupiter, we're using Roman names we're talking about the same pantheon. We're familiar with those guys, but we're not as familiar with the Mesopotamian version. We're definitely not as familiar with the Egyptian version, right? This stuff just doesn't cross our path. And the names in Mesopotamian gods are a lot harder to pronounce, I'm not going to lie. So what we end up with is we have this nexus of Mesopotamian gods that seems really weird to us because it's a sort of developing version of what we're going to find in the Greeks and the Romans. But listen, the Greeks and the Romans have had thousands of years to work on what the Mesopotamians have been doing. It makes sense that what we get to when we get to the Greeks and the Romans is a little bit more sophisticated than what we had when we had the Mesopotamians. And so that's the first layer of this that I want you to pay attention to, is what we're going to find as we get into these things with Mesopotamian religion and how the gods are involved in explaining the world around us, is we're going to create a nexus of gods. This god and that god, they work together, or they're fighting against each other, or there's a thing or whatever. And these interplayed relationships become explanations. So the god of the thunderstorm who provides rain, and the goddess who provides crops from the earth, the goddess of the harvest, they're a married pair. He provides rain like seed, and she produces stuff. In this case, it's crops. It's good for us. And what they noticed in the rain coming to the earth and then the crops growing out of the ground, there's a whole agricultural process involved, and they're not stupid. They get that. But you need some intervention that's beyond you, namely the gods for rain and water. Because they don't get an annual regular flood like the Nile River in Egypt. They need consistent water. They need rain in timely fashions. Okay, so they realize that this married pair of gods works a lot like a human married pair. When a married pair get together, they produce something. It's called children. When these gods get together and the rain falls on the earth, then the woman, the goddess, she produces something, and it's good for us. It's new life. And it's what keeps us alive on a really practical level. And so they start using metaphors they had in their own life experiences as a way to play back into the theology and say, oh, it must be like this for the gods. And so they're starting with information that's theological in nature. But then as they look at the world and they're trying to explain how they understand what these gods are doing and how they work, they end up moving back into their realm of existence and creating explanations from what and analogies from what they see around them. And so we've got this nexus of gods that have interactions with one another just on the basis of what they produce. Thunderstorm god produces thunderstorms. Goddess of the harvest produces crops, but you don't get crops without rain. So as time progresses, we go from scary thunderstorm god who might destroy us all, but might also give us good stuff. Goddess of the harvest, who when in concert with the god of the thunderstorm, we get really good crops. That progresses in time from the earliest accounts to the late accounts, and the late accounts start talking about it in ways like we are familiar. They're a married pair. They're sort of humanized and they're personified. But early, it's not that way. And I'll explain more of that when I get in front of you and I have time to sit with you and talk this through, because it's complex. We're going to have some readings to work through together. These readings come from a set of texts that they come from a text. They come from a book called Treasures of Darkness, which is a historical overview of Mesopotamian religion and how it develops in history, alongside how Mesopotamian society develops. And this progression that I'm explaining sort of tonight in very loose terms is how the book charts this out. And so you start with things that are just, well, the thunderstorm is here, so the god of the thunderstorm must be here as well. That's early on in Mesopotamian life and religion. When you get later, you get a person. It looks like a person, right? Who wields the thunderstorm like Zeus wields thunderbolts. And this is kind of where it progresses to. But what the Mesopotamians are trying to do is not just create these fun, cool stories that keep people online and keep them obeying the gods and fill in the blank. But what they're doing is they're finding ways to explain the world around them. And it starts with some of this information that's revealed, that's beyond them. And then they start looking to say, well, yeah, but so it works like this too. And they start drawing analogies from their life and pulling that in. And here we need to be careful because the scripture is a bit like that and a bit not like that. The Christian understanding of God is something that comes with analogy, and it comes with metaphor, and it comes with an understanding that we're building as we try and explain how God is at work and who God is as he is at work in the lives of the people. But what we're not doing, and we would be really good, it would be really helpful for us to continue to remember this as we go forward. What we're not doing is saying that God must be like these human things because this is how we understand the world going on around us. What the Bible is doing is saying these are terms we can use that puts God into an understandable framework. And there are some really critical differences between the Mesopotamian presentations and the biblical presentations. In a lot of ways, places and spaces, the gods of Mesopotamia are embedded in the phenomenon they're connected to and in command of, where the God of the Bible stands distinct from that phenomenon, but is in constant creation, sustainer, provider for the phenomenon that we don't always fully understand. And so the thunderstorm is God's responsibility. And how God uses the thunderstorm or why the thunderstorm is the way that it is something we need to understand, but it's not because God's in the thunderstorm and he's just all a rage and doesn't like us anymore. There's something that it's more layered and nuanced than that in the biblical accounts. And so that's what we're going to pay attention to as the week progresses forward. There's your introduction, right? I almost said interview. Jeez. There's your basic layout. Okay. I hope that was helpful for you guys. I will see you on Wednesday, and we will pick up with some readings and some materials on Wednesday. Have a good one, guys. See you soon.